What if the way to your unique style is actually through someone else's? That's the question I had when I decided to study the work of Yoneyama Mai. Lately, I've been feeling a little stuck with my own style, and I wondered if breaking down and analyzing other artists' work could help me shape a voice that feels more authentic to me right now. So today, I'm starting that journey by studying this piece from Yoneyama Mai, and then try to apply what I've learned to my own take. To understand Yoneyama Mai's style better, I spent quite a few hours watching her videos on YouTube, trying to figure out her workflow. She usually starts with a very loose sketch to explore framing and composition, then refines it a few times until it becomes the final clean line art. I tried doing the same. I began with a very rough sketch, then tightened it up a bit to have a better base for the final pass. Toward the end, I dropped my sketch on hers to check the proportions and see how far off I was from the reference. And once that was done, it was time to move on to the final lines. Watching her process, and with a little help from Google Translate, I noticed she uses a brush with a pencil-like texture. I couldn't find anything similar in my own set, so I decided to make one myself. I took Photoshop Basic Hard Round Brush and just added some noise in the brush settings. It worked great, enough texture without being too grainy. Refining the line art was one of the hardest parts for me. Yoneyama Mai's strokes are confident and full of variation in weight and pressure, while I'm used to drawing lines all at the same thickness. When I couldn't nail the weight of the stroke in one go, I cheated by thickening one end of the line to make it look right. By the end, I think I'd started to get the hang of it, though it'll definitely take time to build that same level of confidence Yoneyama Mai has. And this is how the line art looked once finished. Like Yoneyama Mai, I split the drawing into layers, in my case, skin, hair, dress, rocks, and background, and from there, jump straight into coloring. In my mind, I split this into two phases. First, laying down the base colors and shadows, and then refining with details. The first step is adding subtle color variations with a soft round brush, something Yoneyama Mai does a lot in her illustrations. On the skin, she usually adds a peachy pink tone in areas like the under eyes, the fingertips, the chin, and the shoulders, all layered over a pale, desaturated base. The same goes for the hair. The soft brush sets the latter areas, usually on the top of the head. These aren't shadows yet, they're just hints of warmth and depth to set the stage for what's next. Then come the shadows. The shadow layer is set to multiply, which is key because it lets the earlier color variations show through. Having the original as a reference made this step easier for me, though I noticed Yoneyama Mai often experiments a lot here, moving shadows around until they feel right. She applies them with the same pencil-like brush as before, keeping some edges sharp while softening others with a soft brush or even a smudge tool. I then move on to the dress. Honestly, one of the reasons I picked this piece is that I'm a sucker for transparent materials. Don't ask me why, I just love them. At first, I misunderstood the design and filled the whole layer, thinking it was a sheer white overlay. Turns out, it was just a thick white border and folds. Once I fixed that, the effects came together quickly. Add some shadows, soften the edges, and suddenly it looked like plastic. Super satisfying. With that, the base colors were done, and it was time to move on to the details. I started by refining the face, rendering the eyes, and adding the smudge lipstick. I also added highlights, mainly on the hair. With just these few extra steps, the character started to really come to life. At this stage, everything is just building on the foundation laid in the previous steps. I also spent some time working on small accessories, like the button, the little hairpin, and the iridescent bow. That bow actually intimidated me a lot at first. Its shimmering texture looked so complex. To make sense of it, I broke it down into grayscale first, figuring out the light and shadow patterns, and then matched colors, blues and purples for the shadows, green for the highlights. Once I cracked that code, it wasn't as tricky as it seemed. Tedious, yes, but definitely doable. Finally, the finishing touches. Scratches on the face, stray hair strands, and a little stickers on the dress. One last touch here was adding atmosphere. With the outer edges of the hairs and fingers lightened by the background color, the character blended more naturally into the scene, giving the illustration more depth. And with that, the character rendering was complete. Here's the before and after. Now it was time for effects. First, I added the rocks, keeping them sharp in the foreground while blurring both the distant and extreme close ones. Then I darkened the background with a simple vignette shading. But the thing I was most excited to try was chromatic aberration, since Yoneyama Mai's method was completely new to me. She duplicates the layer 3 times, then in the layer effects menu, she unchecks everything except one channel, R, G, or B per layer. Stacked, they recreate the full image, but shifting or rotating them creates the aberration. It took trial and error, but once I got it, I loved how much control it gave. You can even trick the colors of the aberration by shifting the layers differently, as you can see here and here. Another common effect she uses is blur, especially iris blur. Since I'm less familiar with that tool, I use it for the main blur, then added regular Gaussian blur to the rest of the drawing. Next, I added chromatic aberration to the character as well. I duplicated the layer, applied the effect to one version, and then used the mask to control what it showed through. I also adjusted the tones with curves, adding a cooler feel to the skin and a touch more green to the hair. One last touch was adding grain. Yoneyama Mai creates a new layer filled with gray and then adds noise. I soften it slightly with a touch of blur, then set the layer to soft light. It's subtle, but it really brings everything together, giving the illustration a polished, cohesive finish. And with that, the study is complete. I really enjoyed following Yoneyama Mai's process step by step and came away with so many useful lessons. What struck me the most though was the strength over lineart. It really carries the entire illustration. Every stroke, every detail feels deliberate and strong. With that in mind, I was ready to take the next step and try applying her process in my own take. One of my favorite pieces from Yoneyama Mai is this beautiful animated sequence. I wanted to create an illustration with a similar vibe, almost like adding another frame to it. As I started sketching, I wasn't really trying to filter her style through mine just yet. Instead, I wanted to step into her shoes, almost pretend I was Yoneyama Mai for a moment. That choice ties into something I've been thinking about a lot lately, my own style. I've been feeling like it doesn't really represent me anymore. Not that I hate it, but it feels a bit disconnected. And by studying other artists, even ones really far from my comfort zone, I hope to gradually rebuild a voice that feels true to what I am now. One thing I want to explore more is stylization, pushing proportions, exaggerating, playing with design. But coming from a semi-realistic background, it feels like relearning how to draw faces from scratch. That's why in this sketch, I kept reworking the eyes and facial features, mostly winging it, while trying to follow Yoneyama Mai's proportions. For now it looks fine. Finger crossed future me doesn't spot some giant mistake I completely missed. And this is how the line art looked once finished. Now, something I've noticed in this particular work is how Yoneyama Mai connects the character to the background flower through the eyes color. It's a subtle touch, but it makes the whole image feel more cohesive. That meant starting with the background. I turned to free stock sites like Pexels and Unsplash, assuming Yoneyama Mai might have used photos too, though I'm not sure. Eventually, I found a simple daisy that felt like the best match for my composition. To prep the photo, I started by cutting out the main elements from the background using Photoshop's Select and Mask. The original image already had a dark background, but separating the subject made it way easier to apply effects later. Next, I ran a Dust and Scratches filter to tone down the realism a bit and push it toward a more painterly look. After that, I went into the filter gallery and, well, basically tried almost everything. I couldn't really pin down what Yoneyama Mai used in her piece, but eventually I settled on a mix of diffuse glow and glass. Finally, I got rid of the halos the filters left behind by painting them out with a mask. With the background ready, I moved on to coloring the character. Starting from the background felt a bit unusual at first, but it actually turned out to be really practical. Once one element was set, the rest of the palette could build around it, which made everything fall into place more easily. I knew the eyes had to be yellow to match the daisy, but I hesitated on the hair color. Brown would keep the harmony, gray would add contrast. In the end, I went with the safe choice and picked brown, but added a touch of blue gradient to reintroduce some coolness and keep it visually interesting. From there, I added subtle color variations with a soft brush, then spent most of my time experimenting with shadows. I roughly blocked them in at first, then refined the edges, keeping some crisp and decisive, softening others. I wasn't too strict about a shadow placement, to be honest. Instead of aiming for realistic lighting, I just wanted to use them to bring out the forms and keep the shapes interesting. With that done, I move on to details. Since my illustrations was simpler than the earlier study, this mostly meant polishing the eyes and adding a few stray hair strands. I also added a touch of orange eyeshadow picked straight from the background to reinforce that color connection I mentioned earlier. And finally, effects. I tweaked the overall image using curves, added a noise layer, and applied a chromatic aberration to the flower in the background. And that concludes the illustration. I really enjoyed this two-part approach. The one-to-one copy helped me see Yoneyama Mai's choices up close, while my own take let me test them for myself. Together, they made the study feel complete. And the whole question of style, that's something I definitely want to keep exploring. For now, this was just the first step, but I'm excited to see where it leads. Hope you enjoyed the video. Let me know if you try something similar. See you next time.